Today I'm going to walk you through on how to replace the membrane on the Model 2R. Our system's already gone through a drain cycle, you'll have to isolate the unit, go into the control screen, press drain cycle, let the system do its drain cycle, which takes 5 minutes, which is going to help drain these canisters down and relieve the pressure in the system. Once that's completed, you can remove the side panels and the hood from the unit so you can get access to the membranes. First thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect all the lines on the upper manifold. The membranes can be changed with the membrane inside the unit itself, assuming you have large enough sealing space to pull the membrane completely out of the unit. If you don't have enough space, you may need to take off the wedge and kind of lean it towards you so you can get more access to remove it from the unit. So first thing we're going to do is use a 5/32 T handle to remove the brackets for the permeate line. Slide the bracket off, and then you can remove the hose. There is going to be some residual water in here, so it's a good idea to have your shop vac next to you and slowly pull this hose out. There's going to be some water that's going to spill out of this line. If it's too high of a flow, you can actually push the hose back in to stop the flow. But once that's fully drained, you can pull it out and fully remove it. We're going to remove the clip for the permeate flush line and pull the hose out. Lead the feed line towards the center of the unit, which is again 2 5/32 Allen bolts. And then remove the bracket, set it aside, and then remove the hose. Next thing we're going to do is remove the top bolts for the support bracket on top of the unit, which is a 3/16 Allen. This is securing the upper manifold to the top cap. If you leave these disconnected, it's going to be extremely hard to remove the manifold from the unit. So you leave these disconnected, and you'll be using a special tool to remove the top cap in a moment. So once those are removed, remove the bracket, set it aside. Now that you have the top removed, you can remove the pins. Depending on how long the unit's been in service, you may need to rotate clockwise and counterclockwise and pull at the same time, but they should come out pretty easily. Once you have those removed, you can pull straight up on the manifold. It doesn't take much force at all to remove the manifold. There's only 2 nipples that are holding it in. So just pull straight up, and you're going to remove the upper manifold for the membrane, and you can set that aside. Next step is we need our top cap removal tool for the RO membranes, which looks like this here. What we're going to be doing is threading on these 2 bolts. There's 2 threaded holes on the top cap here and here that the bracket screws into, and this basically cranks up the top cap and removes it from the RO assembly. Makes it easier to remove it when you're removing it from the unit. Again, depending on how long this unit's been in service, it may take a little bit of force to pull it out, but it should come out fairly easily. So I'm just going to lower the bracket here. And you can just thread these on by hand. You do not need to use a wrench to tighten these down. You just want to make sure they're evenly tightened down so you're pulling it up evenly out of the unit itself. So now that we've got these threaded in a couple turns, we're going to start cranking the tool to remove the top cap, which you're going to have to rotate it clockwise. And you'll be able to see that the top cap is being slowly removed outside of our membrane housing. One thing to be careful with is make sure don't have your finger sticking through this hole, because if you tighten it the rest of the way, obviously you're going to crush your finger. So once you have it bottomed out, you can use this as a handle to remove the top cap the rest of the way. So just kind of pull upwards and side to side to remove it. There are 2 O-rings that are on the top cap. These need to be replaced during service. So you can use your flat blade screwdriver, remove these carefully, install the new ones, re-lubricate them with the Moly Coat Dow 111. And then once you have those replaced, you can set the top cap aside until after we're done removing the membranes. Next tool you're going to use is the nipple removal tool, which is this tool here. When you squeeze down, it opens up the nipple removal tool to remove the main nipple that is inside the membrane. One thing to note, this is a directional nipple that goes in the membrane. You need to make sure the largest gap, the space between O-rings, gets inserted into the membranes. The top 4 O-rings seal against the top cap and then the top manifold. If you get it in backwards, you're going to have a leak coming out of the pins when you first start up the unit. Next step is you're going to use your element removal tool. Basically what you want to do is these hooks that are on the side, you're going to hook onto the brine seal on top of the membrane. I'll show you how to do that. So now that we're hooked on the membrane, we can actually use this as a handle to remove the membrane out of the unit. You can remove the element slowly from the housing and set it aside. One thing to note is, depending on how long the unit's been in service, there is the same nipple that we removed from the top that actually seats in the bottom. Typically that stays in the base of the unit. If it's in the base, it's no problem. You can just leave it as is. If it does come out with this, then you're going to want to transfer the new nipple to the new element that you're going to be installing. So you're going to unpack your new element. Before inserting your new element, you want to make sure your brine seal gasket is always facing upwards. So we're going to slowly feed the element into the housing. You can use your filter handling tool to guide it in, or membrane handling tool, sorry. Because the nipple's down there, it's a tight seal. You'll feel it drop into place and fully seat. Once you're done with that, you can remove the element removal tool and set it aside. We've got the O-rings relubricated on this nipple, and we're going to insert it back into the membrane. So it's going to go right into the center core. Just press down firmly. You'll feel it bottom out. There's a lip in there that will bottom out against, and you want to make sure you have 4 O-rings exposed on the nipple on top of the membrane. If you don't see the 4 O-rings, then you potentially have it upside down, and you're probably going to get a leak when you restart it. So it's important that you see 4 O-rings when you put it back on. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our manifold. I'll set it up here so you guys can see easy. We're going to reinstall the top cap onto the manifold, which is what we use the special tool to remove from the housing. Get it centered as close as you can. There's only going to be 1 nipple on it, so it will rotate on its own. We're actually going to thread in those bolts that we removed from the plate, reinforcement plate. So what I do is I typically just set it in the top of the housing just to keep it centered. And then we're going to grab the reinforcement plate. You want to make sure that the cutout is actually over where the permeate flush line goes. You want to make sure that you have enough clearance for it. You put it in backwards and you're not going to be able to get that the low pressure clip back into the permeate flush line. So we get that centered, and then we're going to hand thread in the 4 main bolts which hold the upper manifold to the top cap itself. We're going to fully tighten these and torque them to spec once we get everything back into the unit. This is just to keep the manifold and the top cap in the center position, so when you put the pins back in, everything lines up correctly. So once you get everything hand tightened down, next step is you're just going to press down firmly on the manifold to get the O-ring sealed and get it seated on the element. So once that drops down, you're going to want to look through the pinholes holes here to make sure everything's lined up and make sure there's no protrusions. I'm going to need to rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise while it's in there just to make sure the pin's going easily. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert our pins. You want to make sure you seat the pins fully. There's going to be a small ball bearing at the end of the pin. You want to make sure that's completely protruding from the other side of the element. If it's not, you might get a small leak once the system's fully pressurized because you don't have the pin in fully. So once you make sure those are both in, we can actually torque the top bolts down. So you're going to need your torque wrench here, and you're going to want to set it to 50 inch-pounds. Once it's set to 50, we're going to just torque these in a star pattern. Just go over it one more time, make sure we get everything. Next step is we're going to reinstall our hoses. So we're going to install the permeate line, the feed line, which is towards the center of the machine, and then the permeate flush line, which is pointing towards the back of the unit. It's a good key to inspect any of these O-rings and replace them if needed during service when you're working on anything. If you do need to replace O-rings, these are going to be spares that are in your installation kit, so you should have extras of those in your tool kit. These also can be ordered from Hans or Colligan International directly. If you do replace them, make sure you re-lubricate them. Even if you're not replacing them, you're going to want to use some of the Dow 111 to re-lubricate the O-ring just to make it easier to slide into the housing, but also make sure you have a good seal. We're going to use the clip and secure the permeate flush line, and then install the brackets for the feed line into the membranes. Just going to thread these by hand. We're actually going to torque these with the torque wrenches also. So these are going to be torqued to 20 inch-pounds. And this is the 5/32, so you have to change the head for the torque wrench. Set at 20 inch-pounds, we're going to torque this one here. And finally, we're going to install the last bracket, which is the permeate line. Just want to make sure you get it centered on there. Don't fully tighten down the other bolt once you get the other one in. It's going to be hard to center it. Once you get it hand tight, we're going to hit it with the torque wrench. The same torque as the feed line is 20 inch-pounds. So once you have everything tightened down, just run through any of the lines you may have removed. Make sure you reconnected everything. We retorqued the 4 main bolts on the support bracket on top of the element, as well as making sure our clip's in. Everything's reinstalled so we can start putting our panels back on, or you can put the unit through startup cycle with the panels off. Just make sure you don't have any leaks anywhere, which is in another video on how to follow the startup cycle. So once you've completed that, you can place the unit back in service, turn off the bypass, and start cleaning up your work site and leave.